as they threw my last suitcase into the cold, dark garage. My hands trembled as I stood there in the driveway, barefoot on the cold concrete, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what was happening in that moment. 3 days. It had been exactly 3 days since my husband died in that car fire, and his family was already erasing me from their lives like I never existed at all, like I was nothing but a temporary mistake, a phase that Julian had gone through before coming back to his senses and returning to his real family. I watched as his mother, Penelope, walked past me without even looking at my face. She didn't acknowledge me. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say anything at all. She just walked back into the house that I had decorated with so much love, that I had filled with memories and dreams and hope for a future that would never come. Behind her came Ruby, Julian's sister, dragging another box of my belongings across the floor like it was something contaminated that she couldn't bear to touch with her bare hands. "Get out," Penelope said coldly. Her back turned to me as she walked back into the house, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor with each step. "You have nothing here. This is our family's property, and you are not family. You never were, and you never will be. So get your things, get in your car, and get out of this house. Now." I stood there staring at my belongings scattered across the concrete floor of that garage like garbage that had been thrown away. Clothes that I had sewn myself, mixed in with clothes that I had purchased, shoes that I had carefully organized in my closet just weeks before, a few personal items that I'd managed to grab in the chaos of those first terrible days after Julian's death. Everything else felt like it had already been claimed by them. The house, his car, the laundry business he'd built with his own hands, all of it. Within 3 days, they had orchestrated the complete and total removal of me from the life I thought I had built with my husband. Within 3 days, they had decided that I was disposable. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me from inside the house. I could imagine them watching from the windows, making sure I didn't try to take anything else, making sure I didn't sneak back inside to retrieve some memory or some piece of the life I had lived here. I could almost hear them laughing about it, celebrating the fact that they had finally gotten rid of me. Before I continue, please subscribe to Precify Stories right now. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Like this video right now, and please, I'm begging you, comment your country down below before you continue watching. I need to know where you're watching from. I need to know that people across the world are hearing my story. I need to know that I'm not alone in this. Thank you so much for that. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how I got here, standing in a garage at midnight with everything I owned piled around me like garbage that nobody wanted. Let me tell you about the girl I was before all of this happened. Let me tell you about the orphan who thought she had finally found love and a family and a place to belong in this world. My story with Julian Green started when I was 17 years old in high school. I was sitting in the school library during lunch period, hiding away from the chaos of the hallways like I did every single day. I didn't have many friends. I was the girl without parents, the orphan that people either pitied or avoided like I was contagious. My grandmother had raised me until I was 15 years old, and then she passed away from a sudden heart attack. One day she was there, cooking my favorite meals and helping me with my homework and telling me stories about my parents. The next day, she was gone. After that, it was just me trying to survive in a world that wasn't designed for orphans. I was trying to figure out how to be a teenager when nobody was there to help me navigate it. Nobody to tell me it was okay to cry. Nobody to make sure I was eating properly. Nobody to pick me up from school. Nobody to help me with my homework. Nobody to tuck me in at night or tell me that everything was going to be okay. I had an aunt who took me in temporarily, but she had her own family and her own problems, and I could see the strain that I was putting on her household. So after a few months, I moved into a small apartment of my own that was subsidized by the state. I was 15 years old, living alone in a studio apartment, trying to figure out how to survive. I got a job at a local coffee shop after school. I taught myself how to cook. I learned how to manage money. I learned how to take care of myself because nobody else was going to do it for me. By the time I reached high school, I had become the quiet girl, the girl who sat alone, The girl who didn't have parents to come to school events. The girl who worked instead of going to parties on Friday nights. The girl that other teenagers didn't know how to talk to because my life was so different from theirs. And then Julian walked up to my table in the library one day during lunch period in October of my junior year, and everything changed. He sat down across from me without asking permission. He just pulled out the chair and sat down like he had been invited. At first, I thought he was going to make fun of me or ask me for homework help or do one of the cruel things that teenagers sometimes do. But he didn't. He just smiled at me and asked if I could eat his lunch with me. Why? I asked him, suspicious. Nobody ever wanted to sit with me. Because you looked lonely, he said simply, and I like quiet. I like people who read. I like you. Can I sit here? Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. Nobody had ever chosen to sit with me or wanted to be around me. I was so shocked that all I could do was nod and watch as he unpacked his lunch from his backpack. Julian Green came from a good family in Houston. His father, Dominic Green, was a successful businessman who owned several properties around the city. His mother, Penelope, came from old money, the kind of money that had been passed down through generations. They lived in a big house in one of the nicest neighborhoods in Houston. They had everything that money could buy, and yet here was Julian choosing to sit with me, the orphan girl with nothing. We talked that entire lunch period. He told me about his family, his plans for the future, his dreams of traveling and seeing the world. He told me about his younger sister, Ruby, who was 2 years younger than us and who he said was the most annoying person he had ever met, but who he loved fiercely. He told me about his father, who was kind but often distant, caught up in his business deals. And he told me about his mother, Penelope, and the way she ran the household like a military operation. My mother is very particular about things, he said to me that first day. She has very high standards for how things should be done. But underneath it all, I think she has a good heart. I think she just gets worried about things. I think she's scared that we're not going to live up to her expectations. I listened to him talk and I found myself relaxing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. I didn't feel like people were judging me for not having parents. I didn't feel like I was broken or incomplete. I felt like I was just another person, sitting with another person, having a normal conversation. It was the most wonderful feeling in the world. After that first day, Julian came to find me in the library every single lunch period. We became friends. We talked about books and movies and music. We talked about our hopes for the future. He asked me questions about my life, about what it was like growing up without parents, and he listened to my answers like he actually cared, like my words mattered to him. 6 months later, when spring came to Houston and the weather started getting warm, Julian asked me if I would go on a date with him. Not a group hangout. Not just sitting together at lunch, but an actual date with just the two of us. I like you, Caroline, he said to me one day in the library, his voice nervous and hopeful. I've liked you for a long time now. Would you let me take you out sometime? Just the two of us? I said yes. Of course I said yes. We kept our relationship a secret because we were both from religious families. His family attended church every single Sunday, and they were very strict about dating and relationships. My grandmother's family was the same way. They believed that dating should only happen if marriage was the intention, and that premarital relationships were sinful. So we kept it quiet. We snuck around. We met in secret places where nobody would see us. For 7 years, this was how we lived. We dated in secret, all through the rest of high school and then through college. We would meet at parks in the evening when it was getting dark. We would drive to restaurants in other parts of Houston where nobody we knew would see us. We would talk for hours and hours on the phone late at night, whispering so nobody would hear us. We would text each other constantly, deleting the messages right after reading them to make sure nobody found out. It was exhausting, keeping the secret for so long. But it was also the most wonderful time of my life, because during those 7 years, Julian Green became my entire world. He became the person I loved more than anything. He became my anchor, my reason for believing that life could get better, my proof that there was someone in this world who loved me and wanted to be with me. Julian told me constantly that he loved me. He told me that my past didn't matter to him. He told me that being an orphan didn't make me less worthy of love or less deserving of happiness. He told me that when the time was right, we would get married and we would build a life together and I would never be alone again. "You're going to be my wife," he would say to me, holding me close in the darkness of his car. "I promise you, Caroline, I'm going to marry you, and you're never going to have to be alone again. I'm going to give you a family. I'm going to give you everything." I believed him completely. I trusted him with every fiber of my being. I had lost my parents when I was young, and I had lost my grandmother, and I had spent years thinking that I would never have anyone who loved me the way that Julian loved me. And now, here he was, promising me a future, promising me a family, promising me that I would never be alone again. When we finished college, when we both had our degrees and had started working in our chosen fields, Julian asked me to marry him. It happened on a beautiful Friday evening in June, down by the bayou in Houston. He took me to a quiet spot where we had spent so many evenings together over the years, away from prying eyes, away from judgment, away from the world that told us we shouldn't be together. He got down on one knee and he pulled out a beautiful diamond ring and he asked me to marry him. Through my tears, I said yes. I said yes without hesitation. I said yes without thinking about the consequences or the challenges that might come. I just said yes, because in that moment, I believed that my life was finally beginning. In that moment, I thought that all of the pain and loneliness and struggle that I had endured in my life was about to pay off. In that moment, I thought that I was about to get everything I had ever wanted. I thought about my grandmother, about how proud she would have been to see me marry someone so kind and loving. I thought about the orphan girl that I had been, sitting alone in that apartment, working at the coffee shop, wondering if anyone would ever love me the way that Julian loved me. And now, here he was, promising me a future, promising me a family, promising me that I would never be alone again. After the proposal, Julian told his family that he was getting married. He told them about me. And then he told me that I needed to come to their house so they could meet me properly, so they could get to know me as his fiancée instead of the secret girlfriend that he had been sneaking around with. I was so nervous about that first proper meeting. I was terrified. I had been in love with Julian for 7 years, but I had never spent any real time with his family. I had seen them from a distance at church, but I had never actually spoken to them or spent time in their home. What if they didn't like me? What if they thought I was wrong for their son? What if they thought I was a gold digger who was only after Julian's money? That last fear was the one that worried me the most, because the financial gap between us was significant. Julian's family had money, lots of money, generational wealth. And I was working as a fashion designer, barely making enough to survive. I had my own small apartment, and I was slowly building my business, but I was nowhere near the financial level that Julian's family was at. I was terrified that they would look at me and see someone who was beneath them, someone who was only interested in their son because of his money. So I prepared carefully for that first meeting. I wore my best dress, a simple, elegant cream-colored gown that I had sewn myself. I had always been good with my hands, good with creating things, and fashion design was my passion. It was the one thing in my life that I felt truly confident about. I did my makeup carefully, trying to look respectful and kind and sophisticated. I curled my hair. I wore my best shoes.
I wanted his family to see me and see someone worthy of their son, someone who would love him and care for him and be a good wife. I was naive. I thought that if I looked nice enough, if I was polite enough, if I tried hard enough, that Julian's family would see that I was a good person. I thought that my effort and my love for their son would be enough to make them accept me. I didn't understand yet that no amount of effort on my part would ever be enough. I didn't understand that Penelope had already made her mind about me before I ever walked into their house. We pulled up to their house on a Saturday afternoon in late June. It was beautiful. A large 2-story home with a manicured lawn and flowers blooming in the garden. The house was situated on several acres of land, set back from the road with trees and privacy. It was the kind of house that I had only ever seen in magazines before. It was the kind of house that made it clear to everyone who saw it that the people who lived there had money and power and status. Julian held my hand as we walked up to the front door, and he squeezed it gently. His hand was warm, and I could feel him trembling slightly. I think he was nervous too.
"My family's going to love you," he whispered to me, trying to reassure me. "Just be yourself, Caroline. That's all you need to do. Just be yourself, and they're going to love you, just like I love you." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that his family would be kind to me, that they would welcome me with open arms, that they would be happy that their son had found someone to love. But deep down, somewhere in my gut, I felt something different. I felt a warning bell. I felt something telling me that this was going to be difficult. But I pushed that feeling away. I told myself that I was being paranoid. I told myself that everything was going to be fine. Julian rang the doorbell, and we waited for someone to open the door. It took a few seconds, and then the door swung open, and there she was, Penelope Green, Julian's mother. She was a tall woman, thin and elegant, with blonde hair styled in a way that must have cost a lot of money to maintain. She was wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She had the kind of beauty that comes with privilege. Smooth skin, well-maintained, put together in a way that suggested she spent a lot of time and money on her appearance. But when she looked at me, I saw something in her eyes that made my heart drop. I saw judgment. I saw disdain. I saw a look that said, "Who is this person and why is my son bringing her into my house?" She looked me up and down like she was inspecting a piece of meat at a market. Her eyes traveled from my head to my feet, taking in everything about me. She noted my dress, probably assessing whether it was designer or homemade. She looked at my shoes, my jewelry, my hair. Every detail about me was being scrutinized and found wanting. Her lips formed a thin, tight line. It was not a smile. It was not warmth. There was no welcome. There was only coldness, only judgment, only a tone of voice that made it clear that she already knew who I was and she didn't like what she saw. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to turn around and run away, but I forced myself to stay put. I forced myself to smile. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Caroline. Caroline Ellis. It's lovely to meet you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and polite. I extended my hand for a handshake, hoping that the physical act of shaking hands would somehow break the ice between us, would somehow make this better. But Penelope didn't take my hand. She just stared at my hand like it was something contaminated, something that she couldn't bear to touch. She stared at it for what felt like an eternity, and then she looked back at my face with an expression of pure disgust. "I see," she said coldly, turning away from me without shaking my hand, without acknowledging my attempt at politeness, without doing anything except walking away from me like I had already been dismissed. Well, let's all sit down and talk about this engagement. She said the word engagement like it was something distasteful, like she was talking about a disease instead of her son's upcoming wedding. We moved into the living room and I met the rest of the family. Dominic, Julian's father, was sitting in a leather chair reading a newspaper. He looked up when we entered and he smiled vaguely at me before going back to his newspaper. He didn't say anything to me. He didn't introduce himself. He just went back to reading like I wasn't even there. Ruby, Julian's younger sister, was sprawled on the couch like she owned it. She was watching me with an expression that matched her mother's, one of pure contempt. She was younger than me by about 2 years, still in her last year of college, and she looked at me like I was something that had been dragged in from the street. "So, Caroline," Penelope began, sitting across from me with a cup of tea in her hands. She had a teacup in her hands, but she didn't offer me any tea. She didn't offer me anything to drink or eat. She just sat there with her teacup and looked at me with cold eyes. "So, Julian tells us you're an orphan." The way she said the word orphan made it sound like a disease, like something shameful, like I had caught some kind of social illness that could be spread to others if they got too close to me. She pronounced the word slowly and carefully, like she was tasting it, like she was trying to understand how someone like that could possibly exist in the same room as her. I took a deep breath. I knew this was going to come up. I had prepared myself for this question, but hearing it said with such disdain, such judgment, still hurt. I said yes, quietly, my voice barely audible. I lost my parents when I was young, very young. My grandmother raised me after that. She passed away when I was 15. Since then, I've been supporting myself. I waited for some kind of sympathy. I waited for her to say something kind, something human, something that showed that she understood what I had been through. But that's not what happened. "That must have been difficult," Penelope said, and for just a moment I thought that maybe there was a hint of sympathy in her voice. For just a moment I allowed myself to hope that maybe she was going to show me some kindness. But then she continued, and hope died in my chest. "It explains so much about your appearance and your manners. People who don't have proper family guidance tend to lack refinement. They tend to be rough around the edges. They don't know how to behave in polite society. They don't know how to present themselves." I felt my face burn. I didn't know what to say. Nobody had ever spoken to me that way before. I had never been attacked for not having parents in such a deliberate, cruel way. I looked at Julian, desperately hoping that he would say something, that he would defend me, that he would tell his mother that her words were hurtful and inappropriate and completely uncalled for. But he didn't. He just looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat. He looked away from both of us, and he said nothing. That silence, that refusal to defend me in that moment was the beginning of the pattern that would define the next 7 years of my marriage. In that silence, I learned that Julian loved me, but he loved his mother more. I learned that when I was forced to choose between me and his family, Julian would choose his family. I learned that I would have to survive this on my own, without his protection. "What do you do for work?" Ruby asked, leaning forward with a smirk on her face. I could see that she was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching her mother attack me. She was enjoying being part of the cruelty. "I'm a fashion designer," I said, trying to sound confident, trying to sound professional, trying to sound like I was worth something. I design clothing for women. I specialize in custom pieces, pieces that are tailored to each individual client's body and style. I've been building my business for a few years now, and I'm starting to get more clients. Ruby and Penelope exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret, but it made my stomach churn. They were communicating something to each other without words. They were sharing some kind of inside joke or some kind of unspoken agreement about me and my fashion design business. A fashion designer? Penelope repeated slowly, like she was tasting the words and finding them distasteful. She said it like I had told her I was a snake oil salesman or a con artist. She said it like designing clothes was not a real profession, not a real career, not something that a serious person would do. From home, I assume. For now, yes, I do work from home. I have a small studio space where I design and sew my pieces, but I'm growing my clientele, and I hope to eventually expand to a brick-and-mortar location, maybe hire some employees to help me with... So you don't have a real job, Penelope interrupted, holding up her hand to stop me from speaking. You dabble in making clothes from your home? That's not a career, Caroline. That's a hobby. That's what women do to pass the time when they don't have anything else to do. How on earth do you plan to contribute to a marriage? How will you take care of a household when you can't even take care of yourself financially? The implication was clear. She thought I was a gold digger. She thought I was after Julian for his money. She thought I had targeted him deliberately because I was poor and desperate and saw him as a way to secure my future. The thought was so insulting, so hurtful, so fundamentally untrue that I felt tears start to prick at the corners of my eyes. But I held them back. I wouldn't let her see me cry. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. I work hard, I said quietly, my voice shaking slightly but still under control. I'm independent, and I believe in contributing to the household. I would never ask Julian to support me financially without me pulling my weight. That's not who I am. I've been supporting myself since I was 15 years old. I don't know how to depend on anyone. I'm not looking for someone to take care of me. I'm looking for someone to love. And I love your son very much. I thought that would help. I thought that telling her about how hard I had worked to support myself, about my independence, about my love for Julian, would maybe soften her towards me. But it didn't. Instead, Penelope smiled. It was a cold, cruel smile. It was a smile of someone who had found what they were looking for, found the weakness they could exploit, found the thing they could use to hurt me. Well, we'll see about that, Penelope said, standing up abruptly from her chair. Ruby, show Caroline to the kitchen. I'm sure she'd like to help with dinner preparation. That will give us a chance to see what kind of wife material she is. A woman's place is in the kitchen, after all. Let's see if you even know how to cook properly. And with that, I was taken to the kitchen by Ruby, who didn't speak to me at all, who just walked ahead of me in silence, leaving me to follow, like a servant following their master. The rest of that first meeting was absolute torture. Penelope stood in the kitchen with me, watching my every move like a hawk. She criticized the way I cut vegetables. She said I was cutting them too thick, and that showed that I didn't have attention to detail. She criticized the way I stirred the sauce. She said I was stirring it too fast, that I was going to damage the flavors. When I added salt to the pot, she said I was being careless and heavy-handed. When I removed my rings before washing dishes, she said it was unladylike and that a proper woman kept her jewelry on no matter what. Nothing I did was right. Nothing I could do would ever be right in her eyes. I realized that evening that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much effort I put in, no matter how perfectly I performed every task, I was never going to meet Penelope's standards. She had already decided who I was before I ever walked through the door. She had already decided that I was not good enough for her son, and nothing I could do would ever change her mind. By the time dinner was served, I was emotionally exhausted. I felt like I had been through a war. I felt like I had been attacked and criticized and judged for hours without pause. I thought maybe during the meal, things would improve. Maybe Penelope would soften once she saw Julian and me together, once she realized that I wasn't what she thought I was. Maybe she would give me a chance. I was so wrong. During dinner, Penelope made a series of comments that were just barely covered in the veneer of civility. She asked if I had real ambitions or if I was just playing around with my fashion hobby, wasting my time doing something that didn't matter. She commented on my table manners in a way that made me extremely self-conscious about every move I made. I started doubting everything. The way I held my fork, the way I chewed my food, the way I wiped my mouth with my napkin. She told other family members who were invited to join us for dinner that Julian came from good stock and wondered aloud what kind of children we would have given my uncertain background. She said it loud enough for me to hear. She said it deliberately, in a way that made it clear that she was speaking about me to others, not speaking to me directly. She was talking about me like I wasn't right there at the table, like I wasn't a person with feelings, like I was an object to be discussed, analyzed, and judged. Ruby watched everything and laughed along with her mother, like they were sharing an inside joke at my expense. They were. They absolutely were. I remember Julian pulling me aside at one point during that dinner, when his mother was in the kitchen getting dessert. He pulled me into the hallway and looked at me with a mixture of guilt and frustration in his eyes. He asked, "Are you okay? I know she's being difficult. I know this is hard, but are you okay?" "No," I said honestly, my voice shaking. "No, I'm not okay. Your mother hates me, Julian. She hates me and I don't even know why. I've never done anything to her. I've been nothing but respectful and kind, and she treats me like I'm the worst person in the world." "She doesn't hate you. She has high standards. She wants to make sure that I'm making the right choice. She's protective of me. It's not personal." "It's absolutely personal. She's being cruel to me on purpose. She's not trying to hurt you. That's just how she is with everyone." But that wasn't true, and I knew it. I watched how Penelope interacted with other people that evening. The other dinner guests, the caterers who brought the food, even Dominic, his Julian's father. She was pleasant with them, she smiled, she laughed. She was charming and gracious and elegant. But with me, she was cold. She was cutting. She was deliberately cruel in a way that showed me that this wasn't just her personality. This was a deliberate choice on her part to treat me badly. I tried to explain this to Julian, but he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to believe that his mother could be deliberately cruel. He didn't want to accept that she might be trying to hurt me on purpose. So instead of listening to me, instead of acknowledging my pain, he just told me that I needed to work harder to impress her, that I needed to try more, that I needed to be better somehow.
And I believed him. I believed that if I just tried harder, if I just did better, if I just proved myself to be worthy, then Penelope would finally accept me. So for the next 7 years, I spent every single day trying to prove myself to a woman who had already decided that I wasn't worth accepting. Despite all of this, Julian and I moved forward with our wedding plans. We had already set the date for June, and we weren't going to let Penelope's cruelty stop us. Or at least that's what I told myself. In reality, I was shaken by that first meeting. I was devastated by the realization that the man I loved was not going to protect me from his mother. I was terrified of what the next 7 years of marriage might look like if his family was going to be this cruel to me from the very beginning.
But I tried to focus on the positive aspects of my life. My business was starting to pick up a little bit. I had a few steady clients who came back to me again and again for custom pieces. I was making enough money to support myself, though I wasn't making a lot of extra money. I was still deeply in love with Julian. And I still believed, despite what I had witnessed at that first dinner, that once we were married, once we had our own life together, away from his family, things would get better. I told myself that marriage would be different. I told myself that once Julian and I were committed to each other officially, once we had made our vows in front of God and everyone, maybe Penelope would finally accept me. Maybe she would finally see that I wasn't a threat to her son. Maybe she would finally treat me with some basic level of human decency. I was so naive. I was so desperate to believe that love could conquer everything, that it could overcome family dysfunction and cruelty and judgment. I didn't understand yet that some things couldn't be overcome. I didn't understand that sometimes, no matter how much you love someone, their family can still poison the relationship. We got married on a beautiful Saturday in June, exactly as we had planned. The wedding was small, just as Penelope had predicted it would be. My side had my 2 cousins and a few close friends from work. That was it. I didn't have the big family that most girls have at their weddings. I didn't have cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents and all these people who had been part of my life since childhood. I had my 2 cousins and a few people who had become like family to me over the years. Julian's side had his extended family, his parents and his sister. Penelope wore a dress that was almost more beautiful than mine, which I thought was deliberately done to upstage me. I thought about pointing this out to Julian, but I didn't. I didn't want to start our marriage by accusing his mother of sabotage. I didn't want to cause conflict on our wedding day. But I didn't care about that on my wedding day, not really. I was marrying the man I loved. I was getting a family. I was finally going to have a home. I was finally going to have someone who was committed to me for life. I was finally going to stop being alone. After our wedding, Julian and I went on a 2-week honeymoon to the Caribbean. It was the most magical time of my life. For 2 weeks, it was just the 2 of us. There were no mothers criticizing me. There were no sisters looking at me with disdain. There were no family dinners where I had to defend my career and my worth as a person. There was just Julian and me, falling deeper and deeper in love, planning our future, dreaming about the life we were going to have together. When we came back from our honeymoon, reality hit hard. We moved into our first house together. It was a small, modest home in a nice part of Houston. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't anywhere near the size or caliber of Penelope's home, but it was ours. We had purchased it together, and it was ours. I was so happy during those first few weeks of marriage. I decorated our home carefully, choosing colors and furniture that reflected both of our tastes. I cooked for Julian. I tended to our small garden. I continued working on my fashion designs. I felt like my life was finally coming together. I felt like all of the pain and struggle and loneliness that I had endured in my life was finally paying off. But then Penelope started showing up at our house without calling first. She would let herself in using the key that Julian had given her, and she would criticize everything about the way we lived. She criticized the way I had decorated our home. She said the colors I had chosen were too bold, too gaudy. She criticized the food in our refrigerator. She said I wasn't buying good enough quality groceries. She criticized the way I did laundry. She said I wasn't folding Julian's clothes properly. This is not how a respectable woman keeps a home. A wife's primary responsibility is to keep her husband's home in perfect order. If you can't do that, what good are you to him? I would bite my tongue. I would try not to say anything back to her. I would try to be patient and kind, thinking that maybe, eventually, she would see that I was trying my best. Maybe, eventually, she would accept me.
More troubling than Penelope's visits was how Julian shared information with his mother. If I mentioned that my business was slow, if I said something about struggling financially, if I made any comment at all about difficulty or stress, Julian would tell his mother, and then his mother would use it against me. I found this out one afternoon when Penelope showed up at our house unexpectedly. I was working in my studio, taking a break to make some tea, when she walked in without knocking. She had let herself in using the key that Julian had given her. "Your husband tells me your little fashion hobby isn't bringing in much money," she said to me, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Poor thing, it must be so hard for you to feel like you're not contributing to your household. It must make you feel like less than a wife." I was shocked. I was hurt. I was angry. I didn't know that Julian had been telling his mother about my financial struggles. I didn't know that he was sharing private information about my business with her. "My business is growing," I said, trying to keep my voice level, trying not to show her how much she had hurt me. "It just takes time. I'm working on expanding, and I'm confident that things are going to get better." "Yes, well, thankfully Julian has a good income," she said. Sitting down on my couch, uninvited, picking up my cup of tea and taking a sip from it like it was hers. "Otherwise, this family would really be in trouble, wouldn't it? Imagine if the woman of the house couldn't support herself. How embarrassing that would be for you. How embarrassing for Julian to have a wife who can't do something as simple as make money." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her to get out of my house, to stop treating me like I was less than, to stop using my orphan status and my financial struggles against me. But I didn't. I smiled politely and I bore it, just like I always did. I went into the kitchen and made her some more tea. I played the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law. I performed the part that she expected me to play. This became the pattern of my life. The years went on like this. I was trapped in a cycle of Penelope's surprise visits, her criticisms, her comments about how I didn't measure up, her thinly veiled suggestions that I was only in this marriage for Julian's money. And Julian, despite his love for me, never fully stood up to his mother. He never told her to stop calling at random times. He never told her to stop letting herself into our home without permission. He never protected me the way I needed him to.
Instead, whenever Penelope visited, Julian would just feel uncomfortable and awkward. And then, after she left, he would gently suggest to me that I needed to work harder to impress her, that I needed to try more, that I needed to be better somehow. He would ask me what I had said to her to upset her. He would ask me why I couldn't just get along with his mother. He would imply that it was somehow my fault that his mother treated me badly. It was exhausting. It was demoralizing. It was soul-crushing. But I kept hoping that things would get better. I kept thinking that if my business succeeded, if I made more money, if I proved to them that I was worthy of being part of their family, maybe they would finally accept me. That hope was the only thing that kept me going during those early years of my marriage. Around year 3 of our marriage, my fashion business started to change in ways I never could have imagined. I had always worked locally, taking orders from women in Houston who wanted custom pieces made specifically for them. But then I took an online marketing class, a course I found on the internet that taught me about digital business strategies, social media marketing, and how to expand a business beyond a local area. I learned how to take professional photos of my designs. I learned how to tell a compelling story about my brand. I learned how to connect with customers across the entire country, not just in Houston. At first, I was just experimenting with these new skills. I created Instagram and TikTok accounts for my business. I started sharing videos of myself designing, sewing, and styling the pieces I created. I made content about women's empowerment, about building confidence through fashion, about how the right outfit could change a woman's entire day. I talked about how every woman deserved to feel beautiful and powerful in her own skin.
I talked about fashion as a form of self-expression, as a way to tell the world who you were without saying a word. And then something magical happened. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, people started discovering my work. Women from across the entire country began finding my Instagram and TikTok accounts. They started reaching out to me with custom design requests. They told me that my message about women's empowerment had reached them. They told me that my designs had helped them feel more confident in themselves. They ordered pieces from me. They left 5-star reviews on my social media. They recommended me to their friends. My order book filled up within 3 months. I had to start turning people away. I was making thousands of dollars a month, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. By year 5 of my marriage to Julian, I was making over $4 million a year from my fashion design business. $4 million from my little fashion hobby. But nobody knew about the success except for Julian. I didn't tell my cousins. I didn't tell my friends from work. I didn't tell anyone except the man I was married to. And I made Julian promise. I made him swear on his life that he would not tell his family about this. I begged him not to tell his mother, not to tell his sister, not to tell anyone about how successful my business had become. I wasn't trying to hide it because I was ashamed of my success. I was hiding it because I knew exactly what would happen if Penelope found out that I had become successful and wealthy without her son's help. I knew she would find some way to use it against me. I knew she would tell the world that I was selfish, that I was too proud, that I was something sinister and conniving. She would probably say that I had manipulated Julian into marrying me so I could use him to help build my business. She would probably accuse me of being a con artist. Julian promised to keep my secret, and he did keep it, at least for a while. He never told his mother about my business during those early years. He never told his sister. But the fact that he had to keep it secret, the fact that I couldn't just celebrate my success openly with his family without fear of judgment or sabotage, told me everything I needed to know about the situation I was in. During those years of building my business, Penelope's visits continued without pause. But now, instead of criticizing me for not having a successful business, she criticized me for my ridiculous hobby that kept me locked in the house all day. She made comments about how I was always on my phone, always on my computer, like I was wasting my life doing something that didn't matter. Julian, don't you think it's sad that your wife spends all her time playing dress up instead of being a real wife to you? She would say once during a visit, while I was sitting in the same room, deliberately making sure I could hear her. A real wife would be more focused on her marriage and giving her husband children. A real wife would prioritize her family over her internet business. I said nothing. I had learned by that point that anything I said would be used against me, twisted into something it wasn't meant to be, weaponized and used to hurt me further. What made it even worse was that for the entire 7 years of our marriage, Julian and I couldn't have children. It wasn't for lack of trying. God knows we tried. We had gone to doctors, we had taken tests, we had been told that there were some medical issues that made it difficult for us to conceive naturally. Every month, without fail, I would get my period, and every month I would cry in the bathroom, devastated by another failure, grieving another month that had passed without me becoming pregnant. And I knew with absolute certainty that Penelope would use this against me too. Once she found out that we were struggling with infertility, she made it my fault. She made it my responsibility. She made it my failure. Caroline must be too stressed about her little hobby, Penelope would say to Julian when she thought I couldn't hear her. A real wife would be more focused on her marriage and giving her husband children. A real wife would prioritize her family over her internet business. Maybe if she wasn't so selfish, God would bless them with a baby, Ruby would add, and they would both laugh like it was the funniest joke in the world. It didn't matter that I was doing everything I could to try to get pregnant. It didn't matter that I was taking medication. It didn't matter that I was going to doctor's appointments every single week. It didn't matter that I was devastated every single month when my body refused to do what I desperately wanted it to do. In their eyes, I was failing. I was failing as a wife. I was failing as a woman. I was failing at the one thing that I was supposed to be able to do without question. There were nights when I would lie awake next to Julian in the darkness of our bedroom, listening to him breathe, and I would think about leaving. I would think about how much easier my life would be if I just walked away from all of this. If I went back to being alone, like I was before Julian came into my life. At least when I was alone, there was nobody there to make me feel like I wasn't enough. At least when I was alone, I could build my business without worrying about someone using it against me or criticizing me for it. But then Julian would roll over in the darkness and pull me close to his body. He would whisper that he loved me, that it would all be okay, that we were going to get through this together. And I would hold on to that hope. I would hold on to the belief that our love was stronger than his family's cruelty. I would tell myself that as long as I had Julian, I could survive anything.
Around year 6 of our marriage, I started having dreams. Bad dreams. Nightmares that would wake me up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding and my skin covered in sweat. My hands would be shaking. My breathing would be shallow and rapid. I would lie there in the darkness trying to understand what I had just experienced, trying to shake off the feeling of dread and terror that the dream had left with me. In these dreams, I saw Penelope and Ruby doing terrible things. I saw them hurting Julian. I saw them conspiring against him. I saw danger surrounding my husband, and I couldn't reach him to warn him, couldn't save him from whatever was coming. The dreams were vivid and realistic. They felt like they were actually happening, like I was actually living them instead of just dreaming them. I could feel the fear in my chest. I could feel the desperation in my body. The first time I woke up from one of these dreams, I immediately shook Julian awake. I was trembling. I was crying. I was terrified. "You had a nightmare," he said sleepily, trying to calm me down. "It's just a dream, Caroline. Go back to sleep. Everything is fine." "No, Julian, it felt so real," I said, my voice shaking with fear. "I had this terrible feeling that something bad is going to happen to you. Your mother and sister were doing something terrible to you, and I couldn't stop them, and I couldn't save you, and..." "Caroline, stop," he said, his voice taking on an edge of annoyance. "My mother and sister are not going to hurt me. That's ridiculous. You're just stressed. These are anxiety dreams. They're not real. They don't mean anything." But they kept happening. Night after night, I would have these vivid, terrifying dreams about Julian being in danger. I would see faces in these dreams. I would hear voices. I would feel genuine terror in these dreams. And every time I tried to talk to Julian about them, he would dismiss me. He would tell me I was being paranoid, that his family loved him, that I needed to stop letting my anxiety run away with me. I consulted a therapist about the dreams. I paid for sessions out of my own money because I didn't want Julian to know that I was seeing a therapist. I was ashamed. I was worried that he would think there was something wrong with me mentally. The therapist suggested that the dreams might be manifestations of my stress about the family situation, my anxiety about not being able to conceive, my general unhappiness with my marriage situation. She told me that the dreams were my subconscious trying to process my real fears about abandonment and rejection. She told me that my mind was creating these scenarios because I was subconsciously afraid that I was going to lose the people I loved. I accepted that explanation because it made sense. These weren't premonitions. They were just my trauma and my anxiety expressing themselves through the dream world. They were just my mind's way of processing the stress and pain and fear that I carried with me every single day. I never told anyone about these dreams except for the therapist. I never told Julian again after he dismissed me that first time. I just suffered through them alone, waking up in the night covered in sweat, my heart pounding, my mind filled with images of danger and death and loss. I wish now that I had trusted my instincts. I wish now that I had believed what my body was trying to tell me. I wish now that I had listened to that voice inside me that was warning me about something terrible that was coming. But I didn't. I rationalized it away. I told myself that my therapist was right, that these were just anxiety dreams, that they didn't mean anything. I was so wrong. In year 7 of my marriage, everything fell apart in a way that I never could have imagined. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in March. I remember the date so clearly because I had been working on a custom order all morning. I had been designing a dress for a client in California, a woman who had requested a stunning red gown for a charity event she was attending. I was so focused on my work that I almost didn't answer my phone when it rang. It was my phone ringing. I didn't recognize the number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer it. Something inside me told me that this phone call was important. This phone call was going to change everything. "Is this Mrs. Caroline Green?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded professional, official, like someone in authority. "Yes, this is she. Who is this?" I asked, my heart already starting to race. "This is the Houston Police Department. There's been an accident. Your husband, Julian Green, was in a car fire. We need you to come to the hospital right away. Your husband is critical and the doctors need to speak to you about his condition." The world tilted. I didn't remember saying goodbye to the police officer. I didn't remember hanging up the phone. I didn't remember how I got my keys. I didn't remember driving to the hospital. All I remember is a feeling of numbness, like my body was moving, but I wasn't really controlling it. I remember my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. I remember thinking that this wasn't real, that this couldn't be happening, that this was part of one of my bad dreams and I was going to wake up any second now. But I didn't. This was real. I don't remember parking the car at the hospital or running through the doors or asking for Julian at the front desk. I remember a feeling of panic that was overwhelming, that was all-consuming, that made it impossible to think clearly. I remember a doctor pulling me into a quiet room, a room that I would come to know was reserved for families receiving bad news. I remember the doctor's face as he told me what had happened. "Your husband, Julian Green, was in a car fire. His injuries were severe. His entire body was covered in burns. The paramedics brought him here as quickly as possible, but..." The doctor paused, and I knew what was coming. I could see it in his face. His injuries were too severe. We did everything we could, but his body couldn't survive the trauma. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Green. Your husband is gone." Julian was dead. My husband, my anchor, my reason for believing that love could conquer everything. He was gone. I don't remember screaming. People told me later that I did scream, that I screamed so loud that other people in the waiting room could hear me, but I don't remember it. I remember falling to my knees. I remember the feeling of my legs giving out beneath me. I remember the floor coming up to meet me. I remember the darkness closing in. I remember feeling like I was dying. The police told me that Julian had been driving his car, a beautiful black sedan that he had purchased for me as a gift just a few months earlier as an anniversary present, when he suddenly caught fire. They weren't sure what caused it. It could have been a mechanical failure. It could have been an accident. They were investigating, but initial reports suggested it was a tragic accident. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Except this nightmare didn't have an ending that I could wake up from. This was real. This was my life now. This was forever.
The past few days after Julian's death are a blur in my memory. Everything happened so fast. One moment I had a husband. The next moment, he was gone, and I was alone again. All I remember is pain. All I remember is the shocking emptiness of the world without him in it. But within the first 24 hours of Julian's death, even as I was trying to come to terms with the fact that my husband was gone, Penelope and Ruby showed up at our house. They didn't come to comfort me. They didn't come to grieve with me. They didn't come to check on me and make sure I had food to eat or that I was going to be okay. They came with a mission. They came with a purpose. They came like vultures, ready to feast on the corpse of my marriage. "We need to go through Julian's papers," Penelope said coldly as she walked through my front door, without knocking, without asking permission, without acknowledging that I was sitting on the couch in a state of shock. "There are legal matters that need to be addressed. We don't have time to waste." I was still in shock. I hadn't even had time to process that my husband was dead. I hadn't had time to cry properly. I hadn't had time to come to terms with the fact that I was going to spend the rest of my life without him. And here was his mother, already in my home, already taking over, already treating my house like it was hers to claim. Can we give it a few days?" I asked weakly, my voice barely audible. "I need some time to come to terms with what has happened. I need time to grieve my husband. No," Penelope said firmly, cutting me off before I could finish speaking. "We can't wait. Time is of the essence in these matters. We need to find out what his will says. We need to find out what assets he had. We need to make sure that everything is accounted for. Ruby, you start looking through his desk. I'll check the bedroom." They moved through my house like invaders, like soldiers taking over enemy territory. They opened drawers and rifled through papers. They claimed things that belonged to both of us. They moved through our home with no respect, no sensitivity, no acknowledgement of the fact that I was grieving. I stood there, numb, unable to stop them. I couldn't find the energy to fight. I couldn't find the will to do anything but stand there and watch as they systematically stripped my life away. But what happened next was even worse than the invasion of my home. On the 4th day after Julian's death, 4 days, not even a full week, Penelope came to me with divorce papers in her hands. "What are these?" I asked, staring at the documents in disbelief, trying to understand what I was looking at. "Our family's legal papers," Penelope said coldly. "We've retained a lawyer. These papers are to ensure that you have no claim to Julian's estate, his property, or his assets. You will sign these papers, and you will receive a modest settlement for the years you spent as his wife. After that, you are to leave this house and take nothing with you but what you came with." "But this is my home," I said, my voice breaking. I could feel tears starting to stream down my face. "Julian and I bought this house together. We built this life together. You have nothing," Ruby interjected, speaking for the first time since they had started their invasion of my home. "You're not family. You never were family, and you never will be. My brother made a mistake marrying you, and now that he's gone, we're fixing that mistake." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My husband was dead. He wasn't even buried yet. His family was already dividing up his possessions like they were pirates dividing up treasure. They were already kicking me out of the life we had built together. They were already acting like I had never existed in Julian's life at all. "I need to speak to a lawyer myself," I said, trying to gather my composure, trying to think clearly through the fog of grief and shock. "I need to understand what my rights are. Surely there are laws that protect spouses." "Do what you want," Penelope said with a cold smile that made my blood run cold. "But I'll warn you, if you try to fight us on this, if you try to take us to court, if you try to claim anything that belongs to the Green family, we will make sure that everyone in Houston knows the truth about you. We will make sure that everyone knows that you married Julian for his money and that you neglected him throughout your marriage. We will destroy your business. We will destroy your reputation. We will ruin you. We will make sure that nobody in this city wants to do business with you ever again. Is that what you want?"
I realized then that she meant it. She absolutely meant it. She would do it. She would ruin me just to make sure I didn't get anything from Julian's estate. She would use every resource at her disposal to destroy my life and my business and my reputation. The truth is, I didn't want his money. I didn't want his possessions. I was making millions from my own business. I didn't need his financial support, but I wanted to honor his memory. I wanted to keep the house we had bought together. I wanted to keep the car that he had given me as a gift. I wanted to keep the life we had built together. I wanted to have something tangible that proved that our marriage had existed, that our love had been real, that he was part of my life. But Penelope was right about one thing. I didn't have legal claim to these things the way she did. As her family, she and Ruby had more legal standing than I did, and I was too grief-stricken and traumatized to fight them effectively. I didn't have the emotional capacity to hire a lawyer and go through a court battle. I just wanted the pain to stop. I just wanted them to stop attacking me. I just wanted to be left alone so I could grieve my husband in peace. So I made a choice that I have second-guessed every single day since that day. I signed the papers. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't fight them. I just gave up. On the 7th day after Julian's death, the day we were supposed to have a funeral service for my husband, Penelope called me and told me to pack my things. "You have until tonight to get out," she said with a cold, final voice. "Pack whatever you want to take with you, but leave any keys on the counter. Don't take anything that is explicitly yours, and don't come back here again. If we see you on this property after tonight, we will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I moved through the house in a daze, throwing my clothes and personal items into suitcases. I packed my design sketches, my laptop, my sewing equipment, everything that I needed to keep my business running. But I left behind the life we had built with Julian. I left behind the memory of every happy moment we had shared in that house. I left behind all of the dreams that we had for our future together. And as I was loading the last suitcase into my car, Penelope and Ruby came outside. They stood on the porch and watched as I carried my belongings to the garage. They stood there silently, their faces showing no emotion, no sadness, no regret. They were just watching to make sure I was leaving. And when I had everything loaded, when I had removed every last trace of myself from that house, Penelope did something that I will never forget for as long as I live. She threw the car keys, the keys to the beautiful black sedan that Julian had given me, at my feet like I was something worthless.
"This car," she said coldly, "was purchased with Julian's money. It belongs to our family now. You will return it immediately, and you will arrange for your own transportation. And if you try to claim anything else that belonged to Julian, if you try to fight us, if you try to come back to this house, we will see you in court. Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to speak. I felt tears streaming down my face, hot and fast, pouring down my cheeks like rain. But I made no move to wipe them away. I just stood there and accepted her words like I deserved them, like I was the one who had done something wrong. They watched as I got into my own car, not the one Julian had given me, but an older vehicle that I had purchased for myself years before I ever met him. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely turn the key in the ignition. But I started the engine and I pulled out of that driveway, leaving behind everything that I had built with Julian. I drove around Houston aimlessly for hours that night. I didn't know where to go. I didn't have family to call. I had a few friends, but I was ashamed to tell them what had happened, ashamed that I had allowed myself to be treated this way, ashamed that I was now homeless and without the man I loved. Eventually,
I drove to a small motel on the edge of town. I paid for a room for the night. I sat on the bed in that motel room, surrounded by my suitcases and my boxes of belongings, and I tried to figure out how to survive. I needed a place to live. I needed to start my life over from scratch. I needed to figure out how to exist in a world without Julian in it. I needed to figure out how to keep my business running when I was too devastated and traumatized to function. The next day, I started looking for an apartment. I found a small studio apartment in a modest part of Houston. It wasn't much. It was about the size of my design studio back when I was just starting my business, but it was affordable and it was all I needed. I rented it on the spot and moved my things in that same day. For the next 2 weeks, I existed in a fog of grief and shock. I didn't leave the apartment except to get groceries. I didn't answer calls from friends. I didn't tell anyone what had happened, except for my 2 cousins, who came over once to check on me and who didn't know what to say to me when they saw the state I was in. I just worked and slept and tried to figure out how to go on living without the man who had been my anchor for so many years. My business was still running. My clients' orders kept coming in and I continued fulfilling them because I didn't know what else to do. Work was the only thing that made sense to me. Work was the only thing that kept me from completely falling apart. And then, 2 weeks after Julian's funeral, something happened that would change everything. I woke up in the morning and felt nauseous. I thought maybe it was just the emotional toll of everything that had happened. Maybe my body was still processing the trauma and the grief and the shock. But the nausea didn't go away. It got worse. I was tired all the time, even though I was sleeping 14 hours a day. I couldn't eat without feeling sick. I knew what it was before I even took the test. Some part of me already knew. I went to the store and bought a pregnancy test. My hands were shaking as I opened it. My heart was pounding in my chest as I peed on the stick. 2 lines appeared. I was pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor of my small studio apartment and cried. These weren't tears of joy, although there was some joy mixed in there somewhere. These were tears of terror. These were tears of overwhelming confusion. These were tears of complete and total devastation. Julian and I had been trying for 7 years to have a baby. We'd gone to doctor after doctor. We had been told by multiple medical professionals that it might never happen for us. We had mourned the loss of the children we thought we would have. And then, just as I was about to give up hope, just after my husband died, my body finally decided to conceive. The irony was so cruel that it felt like a punishment from God. It felt like the universe was mocking me. It felt like this was some kind of cosmic joke at my expense. I was going to have a baby, Julian's baby. But Julian was never going to meet this baby. Julian was never going to hold his child. Julian was never going to know that he was going to be a father. I called my cousins and told them the news. Their reaction was immediate and devastating. They didn't congratulate me. They didn't ask me how I was feeling. They didn't celebrate the fact that I was going to be a mother. Instead, they told me to get it off. You need to terminate the pregnancy, my cousin said bluntly over the phone. You can't have this baby, Caroline. You're alone now. You have no support system. You have no family. You have no husband to help you. A baby will ruin your life. A baby will make everything so much harder. But this is Julian's baby, I said, my voice small and scared. This is our child. This is the only part of him that's left in the world. Julian is dead. my other cousin said, not unkindly, and his family has already shown you that they want nothing to do with you. If you have this baby, they will make your life a living hell. They will try to fight you for custody. They will try to take the child from you. Is that what you want? Do you want to spend the next 18 years fighting with them over your baby? She's right, my first cousin added. You should do it and move on with your life. You're still young. You're beautiful. You can remarry. You can have children with someone who will actually be there to support you. Don't do this to yourself. Don't ruin your life like this. But they weren't just saying this to be cruel. They were saying this because they loved me and they were concerned about my future. They were right about one thing. There was a massive stigma around single motherhood. I had seen it my entire life. Single mothers were looked down on. They were judged. They were treated like they had failed somehow, like they had made a mistake that they now had to pay for by struggling alone. And I was terrified. I was terrified of being a single mother. I was terrified of raising a child without the support of a partner. I was terrified of how society would judge me. And more importantly, I was terrified of how society would judge my child. I spent an entire week agonizing over this decision. I scheduled an appointment at a clinic that performed the services. I went online and researched what the procedure would entail. I thought about what my life would look like if I had this baby. I thought about what my life would look like if I didn't. I scheduled the appointment on a Friday morning. I was going to do it and move on with my life. That was the smart choice. That was the choice that my cousins wanted me to make. That was the choice that would make my life easier.
But the night before my appointment, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in the darkness of my studio apartment, my hand on my still flat belly, and I thought about Julian. I thought about the man he was. I thought about his kindness and his love and his gentleness. I thought about how much he had wanted to be a father. I thought about how many times he had held me when I cried because I thought I would never be able to get pregnant. And I thought about the life growing inside me. I thought about the fact that I was carrying a piece of Julian with me. I thought about the fact that this baby was the only legacy he was going to leave behind. This baby was the only proof that he had lived, that he had loved me, that we had had something beautiful together. I realized that my cousins were wrong. Yes, I was going to be a single mother. Yes, society was going to judge me. Yes, my life was going to be harder. But this was my child. This was the only piece of Julian that was left in this world. This was the only chance I had to be a mother. This was the only way I could honor the man I loved and the life we had built together. I couldn't give that up. I wouldn't give that up. Not for society's judgment, not for the convenience of a life without complications, not for anything. I called the clinic the next morning and canceled my appointment. I told them I was keeping the baby. My cousins thought I was making a terrible mistake. My friends, when I finally told them about my pregnancy, seemed sympathetic but uncertain. Everyone in my life seemed to think that I should have terminated the pregnancy, that I was making my life unnecessarily difficult by choosing to have a baby alone. But I didn't care what anyone thought anymore. I had spent 7 years of my marriage trying to prove myself to people who would never accept me. I had spent 7 years trying to be good enough for Penelope. I had spent 7 years working myself to exhaustion, trying to earn the love and approval of people who had already decided that I didn't deserve it. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I was going to make the decisions that felt right for me, regardless of what anyone else thought. I was going to have this baby. I was going to raise this baby as a single mother. And I was going to love this baby with every fiber of my being, because this baby was the most precious thing I had ever been given. It was the best decision I ever made. It was also the beginning of the next chapter of my story, a chapter that would involve more pain and more loss, but also more justice and redemption than I could have ever imagined. The first 3 months of my pregnancy were the loneliest months of my life.
I spent my days working on custom orders for my clients, trying to pour myself into something that made sense, trying to keep my mind occupied so I wouldn't have to think about the fact that I was going to become a mother without a father for my child. I spent my nights lying in bed, my hand on my growing belly, talking to the baby inside me about the man I loved, about the father this baby would never meet. I told my unborn child stories about Julian. I told them how kind he was, how gentle he was, how much he had wanted to be a father. I told him that his daddy had loved me so much that he had planned to spend the rest of his life with me. I told them that even though their father was gone, his love lived on in them, in the fact that they existed at all. The morning sickness eventually faded by the end of my second trimester, and my belly started to grow noticeably. By the time I was about 4 months pregnant, I was really starting to show. The curves of my body were changing. My face looked different. My whole appearance was transforming as my body prepared to bring new life into the world. I started wearing looser clothes so that my clients wouldn't notice, so that people in the grocery store wouldn't know that I was pregnant. I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. I wasn't ready to have those conversations where people would ask me about the baby's father, and I would have to explain that he was dead. I wasn't ready for the judgment and the pity and the confusion that would inevitably come with being a visibly pregnant single woman. My business continued to flourish even as my personal life fell completely apart. It was like there was some kind of cosmic balance. The more my heart was breaking, the more money my business was making. I was creating pieces that sold out within hours of being posted online. I was getting requests from celebrities and influencers who wanted to wear my designs. I was making millions of dollars a month, but I was spending almost nothing on myself. I was living frugally in that small studio apartment. I was putting almost everything I earned into savings. I was building a financial safety net for myself and my baby, knowing deep in my bones that I was going to need it to survive, as a single mother in a world that was not kind to women raising children alone. I did reach out to a lawyer about the situation with Penelope and Ruby, hoping that maybe there was something I could do legally to reclaim some of what I had lost. But the lawyer told me that there was very little I could do. According to him, since Penelope was Julian's next of kin, she had more legal claim to his estate than I did. I could have fought her, but it would have been a long, expensive legal battle that could take years, and I didn't have the emotional energy for that right now. I was pregnant. I was grieving. I was terrified about my future. The lawyer advised me to just accept the settlement that Penelope had offered me, which was insulting in its smallness, and to move on with my life as best I could. So I did. I accepted the settlement, which was barely enough to cover 3 months of rent in that small studio apartment. And I tried to move on, even though moving on felt absolutely impossible. Every time I thought I was starting to accept that my husband was gone, something would trigger the grief all over again. I would see a couple holding hands, and I would remember holding Julian's hand. I would see a father with his young daughter, and I would think about how my baby would never know their father. I would hear a song that Julian and I used to love, and I would have to leave the store so I could cry in my car. I made a friend during those first months after Julian's death. There was a woman named Hazel who lived in the apartment next to mine. She had 2 children of her own, and she was also a single mother, struggling to make ends meet. She noticed that I looked sad all the time. I'm sure my face showed every bit of the pain and devastation I was feeling inside. One day, she just knocked on my door and invited me to have coffee with her. We became friends almost immediately, bonding over our shared experience of being women raising children, or in my case, about to raise a child, without the support of a father or a partner. Hazel understood the stigma of single motherhood in a way that other people in my life didn't. She understood the judgment and the pity and the way that society treated women who were raising children alone. She understood the fear and the exhaustion and the overwhelming sense of responsibility. She had been a single mother for 5 years, and she had learned how to navigate a world that looked down on her for her circumstances. She told me that being a single mother was incredibly hard, but it was also beautiful in ways that I couldn't even imagine yet. She told me that I was going to be okay. She told me that my baby was lucky to have me as their mother, that I had a strength inside me that would carry me through anything. I spent a lot of time with Hazel during those months. She helped me through the most difficult moments. She listened to when I cried about Julian for hours at a time. She told me stories about her own children and how much being a mother had changed her life for the better. She made me believe that I could do this, that I could be a good mother, that my life wasn't ruined just because I was going to raise a child alone. She became like a sister to me, someone I could trust completely.
But despite Hazel's friendship and support, I still felt alone most of the time. I still felt like something was missing. I still felt like I was waiting for something to happen, like something was incomplete. There was a void inside me where Julian used to be, and I didn't know if anything could ever fill that void again. That's when the dreams started again, but different from before. Not the nightmares about danger and death like the ones I had experienced before Julian died, but dreams about Julian himself. Dreams where he was alive and he was standing in front of me. Dreams where he was telling me something important, something I needed to hear, something that my subconscious was trying to tell me. In one particular dream that I had multiple times, Julian was standing in my small apartment, looking around at my simple furnishings, my studio space where I worked on my designs. He was smiling at me in that gentle way that he always smiled at me. He walked over to me slowly and took my hand in his. "I'm sorry," he said in the dream, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm so sorry I left you alone. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from my mother. I'm so sorry for all of the pain you've had to endure because of my family. I'm coming back. I promise you, Caroline, I'm coming back to you. I'm coming back to us." I woke up from that dream with tears streaming down my face and my heart pounding. For just a moment, just a brief second, I had believed that Julian was really there, that he had really come back to me. But then reality set in. The crushing reality of my circumstances, and I realized it was just a dream. It was my mind playing tricks on me. It was grief manifesting in my sleep. But the dream stayed with me. It lingered in my mind like it was real. It felt like a message, like Julian was trying to tell me something from beyond death. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, some way, my husband was trying to communicate with me. I was 6 months pregnant when it happened. I was working late one night in my studio, putting the finishing touches on a custom order for a very important client in New York. It was around midnight, and I was so focused on my work, so absorbed in the details of the dress I was sewing, that I almost didn't hear the knock at the door. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Nobody came to my apartment at midnight. Nobody knew where I lived except for Hazel and my 2 cousins. But then I heard it again. A knock. Gentle, but persistent. 3 soft knocks on the wooden door. I put down my sewing needle carefully and went to the door. My heart was already starting to beat faster. Something inside me, some instinct that I couldn't name, told me that something unusual was about to happen. I looked through the peephole and my breath caught in my throat so violently that I had to grip the door frame to keep from falling. Standing outside my apartment was a man with dark hair and a familiar face, a man who looked exactly like the man I had buried 6 months ago, a man who had the same shape of his face, the same eyes, the same everything. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought the stress and the grief and the pregnancy hormones had finally pushed me over the edge into complete and total insanity. I blinked hard, thinking that when I opened my eyes again, the man would be gone. But he was still there. He was standing outside my apartment door, and he looked exactly like my dead husband. I looked more carefully through the peephole, studying his face, trying to understand what I was seeing. It was Julian, or someone who looked exactly like Julian. But it couldn't be Julian because Julian was dead. Julian was in a grave in the cemetery. I had been to his grave several times since the funeral. I had placed flowers on his grave and said prayers over his grave. I had sat there and talked to him about my baby and my pain and my fear. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of hallucination brought on by pregnancy hormones or sleep deprivation or the immense stress I was under. I opened the door slowly.
my hand trembling so badly on the doorknob that I was worried I wouldn't have the strength to turn it. I was so scared. I was so confused. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to run away from this apparition that looked like my husband, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the man in front of me. "Hi," the man said, and his voice was unmistakable. It was Julian's voice. It was a voice that I had heard every day for 7 years. It was the voice that I thought I would never hear again in this lifetime. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "No, this isn't real. You're dead. You died. I went to your funeral. I buried you. I held your mother while she cried. I watched them lower your casket into the ground." "I know," Julian said, and he stepped forward into the light of my apartment so I could see his face more clearly. I could see his face, and it was definitely him. It was Julian, my husband, the man I loved. But something was different about him. His skin was marked with scars, particularly on his arms and on his neck. There were dark patches where the skin had been damaged and healed. There were bandages visible under his shirt. He looked like he had been through something terrible, something that had caused him physical pain and suffering. "I need to come inside," Julian said, his voice urgent but gentle. "I need to explain everything. I need to tell you what happened. I need to tell you why I disappeared. But we can't talk about this out in the hallway. We can't risk anyone seeing me. We need to be inside. We need to be private." I was frozen with shock. I was terrified. I was confused in a way that I had never been confused before. But I stepped aside mechanically and let him enter my apartment. Once Julian was inside, I locked the door behind him. I looked around my small apartment, suddenly aware of how small it was, how modest it seemed, how insignificant it seemed. This man, this ghost of my husband, or maybe not a ghost at all, was looking around at my tiny studio apartment like he had never seen anything like it before. "How is this possible?" I asked him, my voice shaking so badly that I could barely form the words. "You died, Julian. You died in a car fire. The police told me. The hospital told me. Everyone told me that you were dead. How are you standing in my apartment right now?" "I know this is going to sound completely insane," Julian said, and he walked over to my small couch and sat down. He patted the seat next to him, inviting me to sit down beside him. I kept as much distance between us as possible, as if physical distance would help me understand what was happening. Part of me still wasn't sure if this was real or if I was having some kind of pregnancy-induced hallucination brought on by stress and grief and lack of sleep. "My mother and my sister tried to kill me," Julian said simply, his voice calm but his eyes filled with emotion. "They paid someone to set my car on fire with me inside it. They wanted me dead so they could inherit my money and my property. They wanted to get rid of you without having to go through a formal divorce process. They wanted to make sure that you didn't get anything from my estate. They wanted me gone and they wanted you gone, and they were willing to commit murder to make that happen." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. None of it made sense. Why would his mother and sister try to kill him? Why would they do something so terrible? Why would they want him dead? What possible reason could they have for committing such an evil act? "I don't understand," I said, my voice small and confused. "Why would they do that? Why would they want you dead? Julian, your mother loves you. I know she treated me badly, but she loves you. She couldn't possibly want to hurt you." "My mother doesn't love me the way a mother should love her son," Julian said, and there was sadness in his voice. "My mother loves money and power and control more than she loves me. She loves the idea of me, what I represent, my status, my wealth, but she doesn't love me for who I am. And when she thought I might lose money because of you, when she thought I might be controlled by you instead of by her, she decided that I was a liability. She decided that I needed to be eliminated." Julian paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts, preparing to tell me a story that would change everything. "The man they paid to do it was someone I had helped in the past," Julian continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A few years ago, probably about 3 years before they tried to have me killed, this man's daughter got very sick. She had some kind of serious infection that required immediate medical treatment. The man didn't have the money to pay for the treatment. She needed about $4,000 and he just didn't have it. I ran into him at a grocery store one day and he looked so devastated, so desperate, that I asked him what was wrong. Julian stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the dark street below. He told me about his daughter's situation, Julian continued. He told me that she was going to die if he didn't get the money for her treatment. I felt bad for him. I felt compassion for his situation. So I gave him the money. I just gave it to him. No strings attached, no expectation of repayment. I just gave it to him because I could afford to, and because his daughter needed help, and because it was the right thing to do. Julian turned back to look at me. My mother and Ruby found out about the man somehow, probably through someone who knew about his daughter's illness, or maybe through someone who worked at the hospital. Somehow they found out that I had given this man money, and they tracked him down. They approached him and offered him a lot of money to set my car on fire. They told him that I was a bad person, that I deserved to die, that I was a burden on my family, that they would make it worth his while financially if he would just eliminate me. But why are you alive? I asked, standing up and walking over to him. If he set your car on fire, if the police found evidence that you were in that car, how are you here, sitting in front of me right now? What happened, Julian? How did you survive? Because the man couldn't go through with it, Julian said, and there were tears in his eyes. He remembered that I had helped him. He remembered that I had been kind to him when he was desperate. He remembered that I had saved his daughter's life by giving him money when nobody else would help him. And when my mother and sister asked him to kill me, he couldn't do it. He couldn't bring himself to murder the man who had shown him kindness. Julian sat back down and gestured for me to sit next to him. So he faked my death, Julian said. He took some of my belongings, my clothes, my wallet, some personal items, and he put them in the car. Then he set the car on fire. He made it look like I was in the car when it burned. The body that was found in the car was not me. It was someone else. It was a body that he had obtained. I don't even want to know how, but it was not my body. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was insane. This was completely and totally insane. The police thought the body in the car was me because of the personal items found in the car. They didn't do a full autopsy because my mother told them not to. She told the police that she wanted to cremate my body immediately for religious reasons. She said that our family had religious beliefs that required me to be cremated as quickly as possible. She bribed someone in the police department. I found out later that she paid a detective a significant amount of money to look the other way. The detective helped make sure that my death was ruled an accident without any real investigation. They didn't check dental records. They didn't check DNA. They didn't do any of the things that they normally would do to confirm the identity of a body, because my mother paid them not to. I don't understand, I said. Why didn't this man just let you know what was happening? Why didn't he warn you? Why didn't he tell you that your mother and sister had tried to hire him to kill you? He did. That's exactly how I found out. The man came to me in secret and told me everything. He came to me and apologized for even considering taking my mother's offer. He told me that my mother and sister had tried to hire him to kill me. He told me about the money they had offered him. He told me about how much money they had promised him if he would just set my car on fire and make sure that I died in the fire. He told me that he couldn't go through with it because of what I had done for his daughter. Julian took my hand and looked into my eyes. After the man told me what was happening, I went to the police. But I couldn't go to the regular police because I didn't know if they could be trusted. My mother had already bribed one detective, and I didn't know how many others she might have paid off. So I went to the state police. I gave them all the information about my mother's plan. I told them about the man they had hired. I agreed to help them set up a sting operation to catch my mother and sister in the act. What? I said. You went to the police? You set up a sting operation? Julian, Why didn't you contact me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? Why didn't you come to me and tell me that you were alive? Because I had to make it look real. I had to make sure that my mother and sister believed that I was dead. That was the only way to get them to incriminate themselves completely. The police needed evidence. They needed proof. They needed to catch my mother and sister red-handed, planning their next move, trying to hire someone else to kill me if the first plan failed. So I had to disappear. I had to let everyone believe that I was dead, at least for a little while. I had to let you believe that I was dead. But I thought you were dead, I cried out, my voice rising in anger and pain. I spent 6 months grieving you. I spent 6 months thinking that I was going to raise our baby alone. I spent 6 months in complete and total pain. Julian, how could you do that to me? How could you let me suffer like that? I know, he said, and I could see the pain in his face. I know, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Caroline, but I didn't have a choice. The police told me that I couldn't contact anyone. They told me that the only way this was going to work is if everyone believed that I was really dead, including you. They said that if you knew I was alive, if anyone knew I was alive, you would react differently. People would notice the change in your behavior. The police would see through the deception.
And my mother would figure out that her plan hadn't worked and she would hire someone else to actually kill me. I felt anger rising up inside me like a fire. I felt betrayed. I felt like he had abandoned me when I needed him most. Yes, I understood that he was trying to catch his mother and sister in the act of trying to murder him. Yes, I understood that he had been trying to protect himself. But he could have found a way to tell me. He could have found a way to let me know that he was alive, that I wasn't really a widow, that my baby would have a father. But I also understood that he couldn't have done that. If I had known that he was alive, I would have reacted differently. I would have been able to see him and spend time with him and touch him and talk to him. And if anyone had noticed my happiness, if anyone had seen me with him, the whole operation would have fallen apart. My mother-in-law would have known that her plan hadn't worked, and she would have tried again. So instead of yelling at him, instead of telling him how angry I was at him for putting me through this torture, I just let him hold me. I let him pull me close to his body, and I cried. I cried for the months I had suffered. I cried for the pain I had endured. I cried for the relief of knowing that he was alive. "What happened with your mother?" I asked him after I had calmed down a bit, wiping my tears away with the back of my hand. "The police arrested her and Ruby 3 weeks ago," Julian said. "They were able to gather enough evidence to charge them with attempted murder. The man they had hired to kill me testified against them. He provided evidence of the conversations they had with him, recordings of them offering him money to kill me. He provided audio recordings and even video recordings of them discussing the plan in detail. The police also found evidence of the bribe money my mother had given to the detective. They found bank records and wire transfers. The detective was arrested as well for obstruction of justice and accepting bribes." "Are they in jail? Is your mother in jail right now?" "Yes," Julian said. "Both of them are in jail awaiting trial. The evidence against them is overwhelming. The man they hired to kill me has agreed to testify against them in court. My mother and sister are looking at spending a very long time in prison if they're convicted. They're looking at potentially spending the rest of their lives behind bars." I felt a strange mixture of emotions flowing through me. Part of me felt satisfied knowing that the people who had been so cruel to me, the people who had tried to destroy my life, were finally going to face real consequences for their actions. Part of me felt sad that Julian's family was going to prison, but mostly I felt relieved. I felt like the weight that had been pressing down on me for so long, the weight of Penelope's cruelty and judgment, was finally starting to lift. "Why did you wait so long to come to me?"
The police arrested your mother and sister 3 weeks ago. Why did you wait 3 weeks to come see me? Why did you let me go through another 3 weeks thinking you were dead? Because the police needed to make absolutely sure that my mother and sister believed their plan had worked, Julian said. If I had come to you too early, if anyone had seen me, if anyone had known that I was alive, the whole operation could have fallen apart. My mother and sister might have hired someone else to actually kill me this time. The police wanted to make sure that they were completely incarcerated before I made contact with anyone. They wanted to make sure that there was no way my mother could reach me or hurt me again. But what about me? I asked him, my voice breaking. What about what I went through? What about the fact that I spent 6 months thinking I was a widow? What about the baby, Julian? Did you think about the baby? Did you think about what I was going through while I was pregnant with your child? I know, Julian said, and he took my hand again. I know, and I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I will spend the rest of my life telling you how sorry I am. I will spend the rest of my life trying to undo the pain that I caused you, even though I did it for a good reason. I will spend the rest of my life proving to you that I love you more than anything in this world. I will spend every single day for the rest of my life trying to make this right. I looked at my husband, my very much alive husband, and I realized that I had forgiven him before he had even finished explaining what had happened. Yes, I had suffered. Yes, I had gone through 6 months of absolute hell thinking that my husband was dead. But he was alive. He was here. He was sitting in front of me and he was alive. That was all that mattered. And then I realized something that made my heart start to race. I realized something that I had been carrying with me for the past 6 months, something that I had been hiding from everyone except for Hazel and my cousins. I realized that I needed to tell him about the baby. Julian, I said, my voice trembling with emotion, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you about something that happened while you were gone. Something that happened after the funeral. Julian looked at me with concern in his eyes. What? What is it? Are you okay? Is something wrong? I'm pregnant, I said. I'm 6 months pregnant. I'm going to have our baby, Julian. The baby we always wanted. The baby is coming and you're going to be here to meet them. You're going to be a father. For a moment, Julian just stared at me. And then his face transformed completely. His eyes filled with tears. His entire expression changed. He reached out and touched my belly gently like he was afraid he might hurt the baby if he pressed too hard. He touched my growing belly and he felt the baby moving inside me. We're going to have a baby? He said, his voice filled with wonder and emotion and joy. We're going to have our baby. After all these years of trying, after all disappointment, we're finally going to have our baby? Yes, I said. Yes, we are. 3 more months. Our baby is going to be here in 3 more months and you're going to be here to see them. You're going to be a father. Julian pulled me close to him and he held me like he never wanted to let me go. He cried. He cried for the months he had missed. He cried for the pain I had suffered. He cried for the relief of knowing that he was alive. And I held him too. I held my husband, who I thought was dead. I held the father of my child. I held the man I loved more than anything in this world. I held him and I thanked God that he was alive, that he had come back to me, that we were going to have our second chance. After Julian and I had cried and celebrated and held each other for what felt like hours, we sat down on my small couch and we talked.
We had so much to talk about. We had so much to figure out. We had to decide where we were going to live. We had to figure out how we were going to move forward with our lives. We had to make plans for the future. I need to tell you something else, I said to Julian as we sat there in the quiet of my small apartment. I need to tell you something about my business, something important. Julian looked at me with curiosity in his eyes. What? How successful is your business? You mentioned before that it was growing, but I never really knew exactly how much money you were making from your designs. I took a deep breath. I had been waiting for the right moment to tell Julian about my success. I had been planning to tell him for a long time. I had been building up the courage to share this information with him. And now that he was here, now that he was alive, now seemed like the perfect time to finally be completely honest with him about everything. I'm making $51 million a year, I said. Currently, right now as we speak, my business is generating $51 million in annual revenue. And I've been making that much for about 2 years now. My fashion design business has become massively successful online, and I've been putting almost all of the money into savings because I didn't know what else to do with it. I have over $100 million in savings, Julian. I'm wealthy. I'm very, very wealthy, and I've been keeping it secret from everyone, except you. Julian stared at me in complete and total shock. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He just stared at me like I had just told him something completely incomprehensible. $100 million? He finally said. Caroline, how is that even possible? How did you make that much money without anyone knowing about it? How did you build a business that successful without drawing attention to yourself? I did it through social media and online sales. I created Instagram and TikTok accounts for my fashion business. I started making content about women's empowerment and fashion design. I connected with women all across the country. My business exploded online. I was making custom pieces for clients all over the United States, and I was making a lot of money doing it. A lot of money. More money than I could have ever imagined. Why didn't you tell me? Julian asked, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. I did tell you. I told you when I first started making significant money. You promised you wouldn't tell your mother. And I knew that if I told anyone else, if I made it public, Penelope would use it against me. She would have found some way to make my success seem like a negative thing. She would have used it as ammunition. So I kept it quiet. I kept it secret. I only told you because you're my husband and you deserve to know the truth about my life. But I made you promise not to tell anyone, and you kept that promise. Julian was quiet for a long moment. I could see him processing this information, trying to understand the magnitude of what I was telling him. So, my mother's attempts to control me financially, to make me feel like I was dependent on my family's money, none of that matters anymore, because you've been making more money than my entire family has. You've been financially independent. You've been building this empire while my mother was criticizing you for your little fashion hobby. Yes, and now we have the resources to do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about money. We can build a life together without any financial stress. We can give our baby everything they could ever need or want. We can build the life that we always talked about building together. Julian reached over and took my hand. He held it tightly, like he was grounding himself in reality, making sure that I was real and this moment was real. We're going to be okay. We're going to more than be okay. We're going to be incredible. We're going to build something beautiful together. Over the next few days, Julian told me more details about what had happened. He told me about how the man who had been hired to kill him had come to him in secret and warned him about the plot. He told me about the police had helped him disappear and set up a fake death. He told me about the investigation that had led to his mother and sister arrests. He told me about the trauma he had endured during those months in hiding. He told me about having to hide from everyone he loved. He told me about the constant fear that his mother and sister might find out that he was alive and try to kill him for real. He told me about the guilt he felt for leaving me alone during my pregnancy without knowing that I needed him so desperately. But most importantly, he told me that he loved me. He told me that he had never stopped loving me. He told me that the only thing that had kept him going during those months of hiding was the thought that he would be able to come back to me and we could start our lives over together. Julian had to go back and forth with the state police for several more weeks while they prepared their case against Penelope and Ruby. He had to give more statements. He had to review evidence that they had gathered. He had to help them prepare their investigation for trial. He had to prepare himself to testify in court if necessary. But whenever he wasn't with the police, he was with me. He came to all of my pregnancy appointments with the doctor. He held my hand during the ultrasounds. He heard our baby's heartbeat for the first time, and he cried. He helped me prepare the small apartment for the baby's arrival. He bought baby clothes and baby furniture. He talked to my belly every night, telling the baby about the amazing life they were going to have. He talked about how much he loved me and how much he loved them already. He held me when I was scared about giving birth. He supported me when I was overwhelmed by the enormity of what was about to happen. 3 weeks after Julian came back to me, the state police held a press conference to announce the arrests of Penelope and Ruby Green on charges of attempted murder. The story made the local news in Houston. It was big news. A prominent family was accused of trying to kill one of their own family members. The story was covered extensively by the media. News vans showed up outside the courthouse. Reporters were interviewing neighbors and family friends. I remember seeing my mother-in-law's face on the television screen, her hands cuffed behind her back as she was led into the police station by state police officers. She looked angry and defiant. She looked like a woman who couldn't believe that her plan had backfired so spectacularly. She looked like she was already planning her defense, already thinking about how she was going to convince the world that she was innocent. Ruby looked devastated as she was led in after her mother. She looked like a young woman who had gotten caught up in her mother's schemes and was only now realizing the full extent of the consequences. She looked like she was starting to understand that her life was about to change forever. But I didn't feel happy watching them get arrested. I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. I felt sad for Julian because even though his mother tried to kill him, she was still his mother. She was still the woman who gave birth to him and raised him. I felt sad for Ruby because even though she had been cruel to me for all those years, she was still Julian's sister. I felt sad that this family, which had seemed so perfect from the outside, had been broken by greed and evil and the desire for control. But I also felt justice. I felt like finally, after years of being mistreated and judged and criticized, the people who had hurt me so badly and tried to hurt Julian were finally going to face real consequences for their actions. I felt like the universe was finally balancing itself out.
The trial was scheduled to begin in 4 months. 4 months. That gave us time to prepare. That gave us time to figure out our next steps. That gave us time to get ready for our baby to be born. Julian and I made a decision. We decided to move out of my small studio apartment and get a bigger place. With my $100 million in savings, we could afford to buy a beautiful house, much nicer than the modest home we had owned before. We could build a life that reflected our success and our love for each other. We found a gorgeous house in a nice neighborhood in Houston. It had plenty of space for our growing family. It had a beautiful backyard where we could play with our children someday. It had room for my design studio so I could continue to run my business from home if I wanted to. It had everything that we needed and everything that we had dreamed about.
We bought the house and we started moving in. We've decorated it with love and care. We filled it with things that made us happy. For the first time since Julian died or was presumed to be dead, I felt happy. I felt hopeful. I felt like my life was finally coming together after a very long period of darkness and pain. But I was also nervous about the baby. I was nervous about becoming a mother. I was nervous about whether I would be a good mother. Julian tried to reassure me over and over again. You are going to be an amazing mother, he told me. You're strong, you're kind, you're compassionate, you're everything that a good mother should be. I have complete faith in you, Caroline. I believe in you completely. And I tried to believe him, or at least I wanted to believe him. As my due date got closer, the trial loomed on the horizon. Julian and I both knew that we would have to testify against his mother and sister. We both knew that we would have to stand in a courtroom and tell the world what they had done. We both knew that this was going to be difficult and painful and emotionally exhausting. But we also knew that it was necessary. We knew that justice had to be served. We knew that we had to stand up and tell the truth about what Penelope and Ruby had done, not just for us, but for everyone who might be in danger from them in the future. The baby was due to arrive in less than 3 weeks. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks. It was all going to happen at almost the same time, and I was terrified. I was terrified of going into labor. I was terrified of giving birth. I was terrified of the trial. I was terrified of having to stand in front of my mother-in-law and accuse her of attempted murder. But Julian was there with me through all of it. He held my hand. He told me I was going to be okay. He told me that we were going to get through this together. And as I lay in bed at night, my hand on my swollen belly, feeling our baby move inside me, I felt hopeful. I felt like despite everything we had been through, despite all the pain and suffering and trauma, we were going to come out the other side. We were going to survive this. We were going to build the life we had always wanted. We were going to be a family. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in March, exactly 3 weeks after our baby was born. I was exhausted beyond measure. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. My body was still recovering from childbirth. My hormones were all over the place. I was breastfeeding our newborn son every few hours around the clock. I was emotionally and physically drained in ways that I didn't even know were possible. But I had to be in that courtroom. I had to stand up and testify against Penelope and Ruby. I had to tell the world what they had done, even though every fiber of my being wanted to stay home with my newborn baby and my husband and pretend that none of this was happening. We had named our son Marcus, not after Penelope's evil family, but because it was a strong name, a name that made me think of strength and resilience and survival. Marcus had Julian's dark hair in my eyes. He was beautiful and perfect, and he deserved to grow up in a world where justice had been served. Julian watched Marcus while I was in the courtroom. He held our son and rocked him and loved him while I stood up in front of everyone and told the truth about the woman who gave birth to him, about the sister who should have loved him. The courtroom was packed. There were reporters everywhere. There were cameras outside the courthouse. The case had become a sensation. A wealthy Houston family torn apart by attempted murder. People wanted to know everything. They wanted to understand how a mother could try to kill her own son. They wanted to hear the details. They wanted to judge. I took the stand and I told my story. I told the court about how Penelope and Ruby had treated me. I told them about the cruelty and the judgment and the way that they made me feel like I wasn't good enough for their family. I told them about how after Julian's supposed death, they immediately started taking everything from me. I told them about being thrown out of the house with nothing. And then the prosecutor showed me evidence. they showed me recordings of Penelope and Ruby discussing the plan to kill Julian. I heard my mother-in-law's voice on those recordings, calm and calculated as she discussed hiring someone to murder her own son. I heard Ruby laughing in the background as her mother negotiated the details of the murder. I had to sit there and listen to that. I had to hear their voices plotting murder. I had to hear the evil that lived inside them. And even though I knew it was coming, even though I had been prepared for this moment, it was still shocking. It was still devastating to hear a mother and daughter speaking so casually about killing someone who shared their blood. When it was time for Julian to testify, he sat in the same chair that I had sat in. He told the court about his relationship with the man who had been hired to kill him. He talked about how he had helped this man years ago because he had compassion for his suffering. He talked about how that small act of kindness had ultimately saved his life. He talked about his mother's obsession with control and money. He talked about how she had never really loved him as a person, but only as a means to preserve her family's wealth and status. He talked about her manipulation and her cruelty. He talked about how she had tried to kill him because she saw him as a threat to her power. And then he broke down. He cried in front of the entire courtroom as he talked about what his mother had done. He cried for the family that he had lost. He cried for the pain that he had caused me for having to disappear for so long. He cried for the trauma that had torn our family apart. The jury watched him cry. The reporters watched him cry. The judge watched him cry. And I could see in everyone's faces that they understood now. They understood that this wasn't just about money and inheritance. This was about a son who had been betrayed by his own mother. This was about a family destroyed by greed and evil. The trial lasted 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, I went back and forth to the courthouse. I sat in the gallery and watched as the case was presented. I listened to the evidence. I watched my mother-in-law's face as she realized that her plan had completely failed.
Penelope's lawyer tried to convince the jury that she was innocent. He argued that she had never actually intended to harm her son. He said that she was just having a conversation with Ruby, that she wasn't serious, that it was all just talk, and not an actual plan to commit murder. But the recordings told a different story. The recordings showed that Penelope was completely serious. She had discussed payment amounts. She had discussed logistics. She had discussed how to make sure that the murder looked like an accident. She had discussed what she would do with Julian's money after he was dead. The jury didn't believe the defense. The jury listened to the evidence and they came to a conclusion. After only 4 days of deliberation, they came back with the verdict: guilty. Both Penelope and Ruby were found guilty of attempted murder. I was sitting in the gallery when the verdict was read. I didn't cry. I didn't feel happy. I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. The people who had hurt me so badly were finally going to face consequences. But those people were also Julian's family. They were the blood relatives of the man I loved. Julian reached over and took my hand. He squeezed it gently. I could see tears in his eyes. He was relieved that his mother and sister were finally going to be held accountable for what they had done. But he was also grieving. He was grieving the family he could have had, the family that had been destroyed by evil and greed. The sentencing hearing took place a week later. The judge listened to arguments from both the prosecution and the defense. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence. The defense argued for leniency. And then the judge made his decision. 30 years in prison for Penelope. 30 years in prison for Ruby. They were both going to spend the next 3 decades of their lives behind bars. 30 years. That meant that by the time they got out of prison, they would be old women. They would have missed most of their lives in the free world. They would have missed watching Julian build his life. They would have missed watching their grandchildren grow up. They would have missed everything.
I felt compassion for them in that moment. Not because they didn't deserve their punishment, they absolutely did, but because I understood what they had done to themselves. They had destroyed their own lives by choosing to be evil. They had given away 30 years of their lives because they couldn't control their greed and their fear and their need for power. After the sentencing, Julian and I walked out of the courthouse together. There were reporters everywhere shouting questions at us, but we didn't say anything. We just walked through them and got to our car and drove away. When we got home, Julian went upstairs to check on Marcus. I stayed downstairs for a moment and just breathed. The trial was over. The verdict had been delivered. Justice had been served. I thought about everything I had been through. I thought about the orphan girl sitting alone in the library. I thought about the young woman falling in love with Julian. I thought about the years of being judged and criticized by his family. I thought about the nightmare of Julian's supposed death. I thought about the joy of discovering I was pregnant. I thought about the shock of Julian appearing at my door alive. I thought about giving birth to our beautiful son. I had survived so much. We had survived so much. And now, finally, we could move forward. Our baby Marcus had been born on a cold Tuesday morning in February, 3 weeks before the trial began. I remember every detail of that day with perfect clarity. I remember the pain of contractions that seemed endless. I remember Julian holding my hand and coaching me through the pushing. I remember the moment when Marcus came into the world and I heard his first cry. I remember looking at him for the first time and feeling love so intense that it almost hurt. I remember looking at his tiny face and seeing Julian in his features. I remember Julian crying as he held his son for the first time. I remember feeling like everything we had been through had led to this moment, this beautiful moment when our family was finally complete. The hospital staff kept asking me how I was feeling. They asked about my pain level. They asked about my bleeding. They asked about my emotional state. I told them I was fine. I told them I was happy. But what I didn't tell them was that I was terrified. I was terrified of being a mother. I was terrified of making mistakes. I was terrified that I would somehow mess up my son's life. But Julian was there with me. He told me that I was going to be an amazing mother. He told me that our son was lucky to have me. He held me when I cried from hormones and exhaustion and overwhelm. He changed diapers. He heated bottles. He held the baby while I showered. He did everything he could to support me. We brought Marcus home from the hospital on a sunny Friday afternoon. I remember walking into our beautiful new house and thinking how strange it felt to be bringing a baby into this place that was so beautiful and so new and so full of possibility. I remember laying Marcus down in his crib in the nursery that we had prepared for him. I remember standing there and watching him sleep and thinking about how my entire world had changed. My business continued to run smoothly even though I was on maternity leave. I had hired a team of people to help me manage the operations. They handled the customer service, they handled the shipping, they handled the social media. I had built something that could function without me being directly involved in every single aspect of it. But I didn't stop designing. Even though I was exhausted and overwhelmed, I still found time to sketch new designs. I still created new pieces. I still posted content on my social media showing my journey as a new mother and a business owner. And my followers loved it. They loved seeing the real me, the woman behind the beautiful designs, the woman who was now a mother. The trial brought a lot of attention to my story. Media outlets picked it up. People were fascinated by my journey. I went from being the woman that nobody knew about to being a public figure. News outlets wanted to interview me. Talk shows wanted me to come on and tell my story. Magazines wanted to feature me. I did some interviews. I was careful about what I said and how I said it. I was careful not to be too bitter about what Penelope and Ruby had done. But I was also honest. I told people about the pain and the suffering and the injustice that I had experienced. I told people about how I had survived. I told people about my baby and my business and my gratitude for being alive. After the trial ended and the verdict came in, Julian and I made a decision. We decided to use part of my wealth to reclaim what had been taken from us. We hired lawyers to go through the legal process of recovering Julian's assets. We fought to get back the house that Penelope had kicked me out of. We fought to get back Julian's laundry business. We fought to reclaim everything that had been stolen from us. It took several months of legal battles, but we eventually won. We got back the house. We got back the business. We got back everything that was rightfully ours. More than that, we were able to prove that Penelope had illegally transferred assets and money to herself and Ruby. We were able to recover those assets and add them to what was already rightfully ours.
When we finally had the keys to our old house in our hands, Julian and I drove over there together. We stood in the driveway and looked at the place where we had lived together, where we had dreamed about having a baby, where Penelope had thrown my belongings into the garage. "Do you want to keep it?" Julian asked me. "Or do you want to sell it?" I thought about it for a moment. That house held so many memories, some beautiful, some painful. It was the place where I had fallen in love with my husband. It was the place where his family had hurt me. It was a place where I had suffered. "Let's sell it," I said. "Let's sell it and use the money to help other people. Let's donate it to my foundation. Let's use it to help women who are in situations like I was in." Julian nodded. He understood what I was saying. He understood that holding on to that house would only keep us tied to the past. We needed to move forward. We needed to build something new. We did sell the house. We donated the proceeds to my foundation. And with that money, we were able to expand our programs significantly. We were able to help more women. We were able to change more lives. The laundry business was different. That was something that Julian had built. That was something that represented his work and his effort and his dreams. So we decided to keep it. We decided to run it together, Julian and I, and to use the profits to support our family and to fund my foundation. Over the next year, our lives transformed completely. I went back to work after my maternity leave ended. I was ready to dive back into my business. I had so many ideas for new designs. I had so much energy to create. I started a new line of clothing specifically designed for single mothers. I called it the Resilience Collection. Every piece in the collection was designed to make women feel powerful and beautiful and capable. Every piece was designed to celebrate the strength of women who were raising children on their own. And a portion of the proceeds from every sale went directly to my foundation. The Resilience Collection became incredibly popular. Women from all over the country started buying pieces from the collection. They wrote me letters telling me how the clothes made them feel. They told me that wearing my designs made them feel like they could conquer the world. They told me that my story had inspired them to believe in themselves. I also started speaking publicly about single motherhood and the stigma that surrounds it. I gave talks at women's conferences. I was interviewed on podcasts. I wrote articles for magazines. I used every platform available to me to talk about how society judges women who raise children alone and how wrong that judgment is. I talked about how I almost gave up my baby because of that stigma. I talked about how I almost let other people's judgment convince me to make a decision that would have destroyed me. I talked about how important it is for women to believe in themselves and to make decisions based on what's right for them, not based on what society thinks is right. And I talked about Julian. I talked about how grateful I was that he had come back to me.
I talked about how our love had survived everything that had been thrown at it. I talked about how we had built a life together that was stronger and more beautiful than it had ever been before. Marcus grew up surrounded by love and support. Julian was a devoted father. He spent time with him every single day. He played with him. He read to him. He taught him about the world. He showed Marcus what it meant to be a good man, a kind man, a man who treated women with respect and love. I watched my son grow, and I saw the man he was going to become. I saw Julian's gentle nature reflected in his eyes. I saw my strength reflected in his determination. I saw a beautiful combination of both of us in this child that we had created together. A year after the trial ended, Julian and I renewed our vows. We had a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family. We didn't have a big, expensive wedding. We didn't need that. We just needed to stand in front of the people who loved us and recommit to each other, to the life we were building together, to the family we had created. I wore a dress that I had designed myself. It was white and elegant, and it symbolized new beginnings and fresh starts. Julian wore a simple black suit. We held hands and looked into each other's eyes and made our promises to each other, all over again. "I promise to love you," Julian said, "even when life is difficult. I promise to protect you and support you and be there for you always. I promise to be a good father to our son. I promise to spend the rest of my life making up for the pain I caused you, even though I did it for a good reason. I promise that nothing will ever separate us again." "I promise to love you," I said back, "with everything that I am. I promise to build a life with you that is full of joy and beauty and meaning. I promise to raise our son with the values of kindness and strength and integrity. I promise to stand by you always. I promise to never give up on us no matter what challenges we face." And then we kissed, and our friends and family cheered, and I felt like I was finally home. I felt like I had finally arrived at the place I was supposed to be. Over the next few years, my foundation grew significantly. We opened offices in major cities across the country. We provided financial assistance to thousands of women who were struggling to raise children on their own. We provided job training and education programs. We provided childcare assistance. We provided legal support for women dealing with custody issues and divorce proceedings. We did everything we could to support women who were in situations like I had been in. The foundation became known for its work. Other organizations reached out to us and asked us to partner with them. We started collaborating with nonprofits across the country. We started making real, measurable change in women's lives. And my fashion business continued to thrive. I launched new collections, I expanded into new markets, I started selling my designs in boutiques and department stores across the country. I became a recognized name in the fashion industry. Young designers reached out to me asking for advice. Women reached out to me telling me that my designs had changed their lives, had made them feel beautiful and confident and powerful. But the most important part of my life wasn't my business or my foundation. The most important part of my life was my family. It was watching Julian be an amazing father to Marcus. It was seeing the love between them, the bond that they shared. It was waking up in the morning next to the man I loved and feeling grateful that he was alive, that he had come back to me, that we had been given a second chance. Looking back at everything I had been through, I realized something profound. I realized that the stigma around single motherhood almost cost me my son. I had been so close to making a decision that would have changed my entire life, that would have taken away the greatest joy I have ever known. If I had listened to my cousins, if I had listened to society's judgment, if I had believed that being a single mother was a failure instead of a strength, if I had let other people's opinions matter more than my own desires, I would have lost my son.
And in losing my son, I would have lost the greatest gift that I have ever been given. I would have lost the love of a child. I would have lost the experience of being a mother. I would have lost the most beautiful, most challenging, most rewarding experience of my life. So I started speaking out about this. I started telling women that single motherhood is not a failure. I started telling women that being a single mother doesn't make you broken or incomplete or less than. I started telling women that society's judgment about single mothers is wrong and harmful and needs to change. I told women about my experience. I told them about how I had almost given up my baby because of stigma. I told them about how I had struggled as a single mother for those 6 months when I thought Julian was dead. I told them about how hard it had been. And I told them about how worth it all was. I told them that I wouldn't change a single thing about my journey, even the painful parts, because my journey had led me to my son. I became an advocate for changing the way society views single mothers. I wrote articles, I gave speeches, I participated in panel discussions. I used my platform and my influence to fight against the stigma. And slowly, I started to see change. I started to see society's attitudes shifting. I started to see single mothers being treated with more respect and less judgment. But I also made sure that people understood the full picture of my story. I made sure that they understood that I wasn't just talking about single motherhood in the abstract. I was talking about my specific experience. I was talking about the pain and the struggle and the trauma that I had endured. I was talking about the evil of Penelope and Ruby and their attempt to murder my husband. I was talking about justice being served. I was talking about how important it is to hold people accountable for their actions. I wanted people to understand that just because I am a single mother and I survived, doesn't mean that single mothers should have to survive abuse and cruelty. I wanted people to understand that yes, single mothers are strong, but that strength should be celebrated, not used as an excuse to make their lives harder. I wanted people to understand that society should be supporting single mothers, not judging them. Years passed and my life became full in ways I never could have imagined. Julian and I had more children. We had a daughter who we named Haven because she was our safe place. We had another son who we named Miles after one of the police officers who had helped us during our darkest days. Our family grew and grew, and with each new child, my love for Julian grew as well. I watched Julian be a father to our children, and I fell in love with him all over again. I watched him hold our newborns and rock them to sleep. I watched him read bedtime stories to our older children. I watched him teach our children about kindness and integrity and the importance of treating people with respect. I watched him be the father that his own mother had never allowed him to be to her. Our house filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of a large family. We had family dinners where everyone talked over each other trying to tell their stories. We had game nights where we played and laughed until our sides hurt. We had quiet moments where we sat together and just enjoyed being near each other. And through it all, I never forgot where I came from. I never forgot the pain and the suffering and the trauma. I never forgot the orphan girl sitting alone in the library. I never forgot the young woman being judged for not having a family. I never forgot the grief of losing my husband and then the shock of him coming back. I never forgot any of it. I used those memories to fuel my work. Every time I felt tired or overwhelmed or like maybe I should take a break from my foundation work, I would think about the women I had helped.
I would think about the emails I received from single mothers telling me that my foundation had saved their lives. I would think about the children who had gone to college because of scholarships provided by my foundation. I would think about the women who had started businesses and become entrepreneurs because of the job training provided by my foundation. And I would keep going. I would keep working. I would keep fighting for women and children and families and justice. My life has not been easy. My life has been filled with pain and loss and trauma. But my life has also been filled with joy and love and meaning. And I would not change a single thing about my journey, even the painful parts, because my journey has made me who I am. To anyone watching this story, to anyone who feels like they are not enough, to anyone who feels like they don't deserve love or happiness or success, I want to say this: you are enough. You deserve everything good in this world. You have the strength inside of you to survive anything. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. To the single mothers watching this, I want to say your strength is your superpower. Your love for your children is the most powerful force in the universe. Don't let society's judgment make you feel like you are less than. You are everything. You are enough. To anyone who has experienced abuse or cruelty from their family, I want to say you are not alone. Your pain is valid, your suffering matters, and you deserve justice. You deserve to be protected. You deserve to be loved and respected and treated with kindness. To anyone who has lost someone they love, I want to say your grief is valid, your pain is real. But I also want to tell you that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is hope. There is the possibility of healing. There is the possibility of joy again. I stand here today, years after all of this happened, and I am grateful. I am grateful for my husband. I am grateful for my children. I am grateful for my business. I am grateful for my foundation. I am grateful for the opportunity to tell my story and hopefully inspire other people to believe in themselves and to fight for what they deserve. Most importantly, I am grateful that I survived. I am grateful that I was given a second chance. I am grateful that I didn't give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. I am grateful that I believed in myself and my strength and my resilience. And now, I want to share something with all of you who are watching this. I want to ask you a question. If you were in my situation, what would you have done? Would you have given up your baby because of society's judgment? Would you have given up on the baby because of bad in-laws? Would you have accepted the cruelty and stayed silent? Or would you have done what I did? Would you have fought for your baby? Would you have believed in yourself? Would you have stood up to injustice and refused to be silenced? I want to know what you would have done. Please comment below and tell me. Tell me whether you would have made the same choices that I made or different choices. And I want to remind you of something. Subscribe to Precify Stories right now. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Like this video, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. There are so many other stories on this channel like mine. There are so many other women who have survived trauma and overcome obstacles and built beautiful lives for themselves. Thank you for being a part of my journey. Thank you for listening.